Imagine standing at the bottom of a massive roaring waterfall, and you're armed with nothing but a tiny paper cup.
Oh, that's a bleak image.
Yeah.
But yeah, highly accurate.
Right. That is exactly what trying to stay informed feels like today. You are just trying to get a quick sip of what's happening in the world, trying to be a responsible citizen.
But instead, you're getting absolutely blasted by this relentless, deafening torrent of news, crises, and social media updates.
Exactly. And you usually walk away from your phone feeling soaked, heavy, and honestly a little numb. But what if the core problem isn't actually the volume of the water?
Right. What if the problem is the cup you're holding?
Yes. So today we're exploring a fascinating narrative called The Architecture of the Modern Conscience. It's this contemplative text that maps out exactly why our digital habits leave us feeling so hollow.
And the beauty of it is that it actually offers a radical new way to process information.
It really does. So the author constructs this brilliant framework by introducing us to a virtual neighborhood where 4 characters interact online. We meet the aunt, the uncle, the nephew, and Roger.
And to really understand this text, it's helpful to think of these 4 not necessarily as literal family members, but as different archetypes.
Like voices in your head.
Exactly. They represent the competing voices inside your own head when you're staring at your screen.
Yep.
Through their dialogue, the narrative builds a comprehensive map of how the modern mind processes external trauma.
So the mission of our deep dive today is to use that map to figure out how to navigate digital spaces, how to interact online and consume media, not just with our intellect, but with true human excellence.
Because relying purely on the intellect to filter the news is, well, it's clearly not working for us anymore.
It fundamentally isn't, and that's because this narrative isn't really concerned with the specific events or the breaking news itself.
No, not at all. It focuses entirely on the internal mechanisms of our conscience. It asks us to examine the psychological machinery that dictates our reactions when we're confronted with that endless stream of global information.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the narrative drops us into a scenario that plays out, millions of times a day.
Oh, absolutely. Every second.
The characters are in their shared digital space and someone has posted a link, but they haven't opened it yet. The link just sits there, closed.
Yeah, in scene 3. And the tension surrounding this unopened link is incredibly palpable.
The nephew immediately starts pushing to click it. He's driven by this anxious curiosity, and he keeps asking, what if it's actually important?
We all recognize that itch, don't we? It's the psychological pull of the notification badge or, the ambiguous headline.
The clickbait.
Exactly. The nephew embodies our modern compulsion to consume immediately. He's terrified that we might be missing critical context about the world.
But then the aunt introduces a much heavier perspective. She points out that while they are sitting there debating the link, real people out in the physical world might actually be suffering.
Right. She feels the tangible moral weight of the events hidden behind that URL.
And the uncle steps in and validates her concern.
Yeah.
He acknowledges that, if the pain is real, waiting is difficult. But he draws a hard line.
He absolutely refuses to look in haste. He insists on a deliberate pause.
It's like standing in front of a locked door where a crisis is happening on the other side.
Fine.
Our absolute first instinct is to just bust it down immediately.
Yeah, just turn the knob and rush right in.
Right. But the uncle is standing in front of the door asking us to check what we are carrying in our hands before we turn the knob.
What's fascinating here is how Roger, the 4th character, articulates what checking your hands actually entails.
He has a realization that kind of shifts the entire paradigm of the text, doesn't he?
He really does. Roger suggests that the primary issue is not what we look at, but how we look. He takes the spotlight off the external object, the news story, and turns it inward onto the consumer.
Which prompts this moment of intense vulnerability where the characters begin to dissect their own internal states. They literally confess the hidden emotional baggage they're carrying right before they click a link.
And the aunt's confession is startling, because it's something people rarely admit to themselves, let alone out loud to others.
Yeah, she realizes that before she even opens a piece of news, there's already an anger waiting inside her. The anger precedes the information entirely.
It's a brilliant self-diagnosis.
Yeah.
She realizes she's scrolling through her feed specifically to find a target for a pre-existing rage.
Which, let's be honest, happens all the time.
Oh, constantly. Psychologically, we carry low-level frustrations from our personal lives, our jobs, our relationships.
And we unconsciously seek out outrageous headlines because they provide a socially acceptable outlet for that anger.
Exactly. And then the nephew examines his own motives. He admits that his primary driver is validation. He doesn't look at links to learn the truth.
He looks to find evidence that he's already right. He's just hunting for ammunition to reinforce his own ego.
Yeah. And then Roger follows up with a confession that feels deeply, deeply tied to the modern condition.
This one hit me hard. He admits that he consumes the news, the crises of strangers, simply to feel less alone.
Right. He is using the chaos of the world as a temporary cure for his own isolation.
So we have to pause here and ask you, the listener, to do some self-reflection. Tomorrow morning when you open your phone, which of those three are you? Are you angry, wanting to be right, or just lonely?
Sitting with that question is uncomfortable for sure, but it's necessary for the uncle's next major insight.
Yeah, because he listens to these confessions and points out something huge. Even if they all click the exact same link, read the exact same article, and process the exact same facts.
They're all engaging with reality using a completely different intention.
Which prompts the ant to ask whether they should be worried about the news itself or their intention. And the uncle's response is basically the thesis of this entire concept.
He says the concern is the intention. Because, quote, if the intention is corrupted, even the most accurate news becomes poison.
Wait a minute. I have to play devil's advocate here because I genuinely struggle with this concept. Facts are facts, right?
Sure they are.
So how can accurate news possibly become poison just because my intention is bad? If I'm reading an objective report about a real event, the truth doesn't change based on my internal state.
And that's the natural hurdle we all hit. The nephew actually pushes back with that exact same logic in the text. He struggles to understand how objective reality can be poisoned by subjective emotion.
Because it sounds almost counterintuitive.
It does. But we need to look at the psychology of what the uncle means by a corrupted intention. He isn't suggesting that the facts on the screen suddenly transform into literal lies.
Okay.
He's arguing that the effect of those facts on your human conscience becomes toxic.
But how so? If I'm learning what happened in the world, isn't that inherently a good thing?
Not if your consumption commodifies someone else's reality. Think about it in practice. Let's say you take a perfectly accurate piece of information about a tragedy.
Right.
And you use it solely as a bludgeon to win a political argument online. Or you use it to feed your own cynical worldview and validate your pre-existing rage.
Oh, I see.
By doing that, you've corrupted the moral purpose of that truth. You're no longer honoring the reality of the people involved. You're exploiting their suffering to serve your own emotional baggage.
Wow, you are turning real-world pain into a prop for your own ego.
Precisely. And the psychological danger here is that when you habitually exploit the truth this way, it erodes your conscience over time.
You slowly train your brain to view global events merely as fuel for your own internal drama.
Exactly. And the nephew grasps the severity of this, which leads him to kind of panic. He asks how anyone can possibly purify their intention, given that human beings are so incredibly skilled at deceiving themselves.
We really are. We can justify almost any digital behavior if we convince ourselves we're just staying informed. So what is a defense mechanism against our own self-deception?
Well, Roger steps in with the solution. And it really redefines how we should approach the digital age. He suggests maybe that's why we shouldn't look alone.
The uncle validates this instantly. He tells them that is exactly why we are here, meaning the entire purpose of their virtual neighborhood isn't just to share links and debate news stories.
No, it's a system of mutual accountability. It highlights a vital distinction in how we build online communities.
How so?
Well, the journey of these characters isn't about assembling an echo chamber where everyone agrees on the same ideas. It's not about sharing the same political worldview. The goal is a community that seeks the same pure intention.
They are helping each other filter their approach to reality. The ultimate question becomes, with what are we looking?
Exactly. With what are we looking?
So we've established the vital importance of checking our internal baggage before we click the link. But, I mean, let's be real. Even if your intentions are perfectly pure and your ego is in check, consuming the news still hurts.
It really does. And as the conversation evolves in the narrative, the characters are forced to confront what happens after we look. Specifically, how we're supposed to process the pain of others once the screen goes dark.
Transitioning into scene 4, the fallout from consuming information is often heavier than the anticipation.
Yeah, even after they close the link, the emotional residue of the images remains.
Roger experiences this viscerally. He has a terrible sleepless night. He's haunted by an image they saw, described in the text as a face, humiliated, unheard, left alone in the middle of a crowd.
It's a haunting image.
Yeah. And as he lies awake in the dark, wrestling with this memory, he starts murmuring about the concept of the ego. He realizes that in certain moments, a human being's internal world can harden like stone.
So when the characters gather back in their virtual space the next day, the atmosphere is heavy. They don't rehash the specific details of the video. They don't need to debate the politics of it.
They're all collectively dealing with the psychological aftermath. And the ant introduces a concept here that gives a name to a phenomenon I think many of us feel, but, we struggle to articulate it.
Yeah, she asks, sometimes a person does not commit evil, but don't they also postpone goodness?
Postponed goodness.
It's an arresting phrase because it captures the passive nature of modern complicity.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the nephew catches the subtle horror of this distinction. He points out that evil is visible. It's an aggressive action.
Right. It's loud. It's obvious. You can point a camera at it.
But postponed goodness is entirely silent. It's the absence of an action. It's the difference between actively tripping someone on the sidewalk versus watching them fall and deciding you're too busy to help them up.
One is an action. The other is an omission.
Right. But the tragic reality is that both choices leave the person on the ground.
That analogy captures the mechanism perfectly. And the uncle anchors this concept of silent omission with a profound, heavy observation.
What does he say?
He tells the group, ego rarely shouts. It is cold, it is like stone, and it hardens most when looking at another's pain.
It hardens most when looking at another's pain. Why does empathy trigger that specific reaction? I mean, you'd think looking at pain would soften us, not turn us to stone.
It comes down to the biological and psychological limitations of empathy. Witnessing pain inherently demands something of us. True empathy requires us to extend ourselves, to feel discomfort.
To acknowledge our own vulnerability.
Exactly. But the ego's primary function is self-preservation. It hates vulnerability. So when you're confronted with the severe suffering of another person, especially suffering, you have no power to fix to help it. The ego's defense mechanism is to freeze.
It deliberately shuts down the empathy channels to protect your psyche from being overwhelmed.
Yes. And when we scale that psychological defense mechanism up to the reality of the digital age, the implications are just massive.
Because we aren't just seeing one person fall on the sidewalk, our algorithms are serving us images of thousands of people falling, suffering, and experiencing tragedy across the globe every single day.
And that constant unnatural bombardment acts as a freezing agent on our empathy if we aren't careful. We habituate to the suffering of others because our brains simply cannot process that volume of trauma without shutting down.
Which brings us to Roger's confession the morning after watching the video. He admits that he stayed silent the day before, but he realizes there's a massive difference, a very thin line between silence and stillness.
And the nephew asks where that line actually begins. He wants a practical rule. The uncle's explanation here serves as a masterclass in moral philosophy.
He says, when a person remains silent to protect themselves, it is one thing. When they remain silent because they place themselves at the center, it is another.
It's a staggering distinction.
So implementing boundaries, taking a mental health break from the news, or just stepping away from the fire hose to protect your sanity, that is one kind of silence.
Right, that's self-protection.
But the moment you place yourself at the center, the moment your silence transforms into apathy, because you prioritize your own comfort over acknowledging someone else's humanity, that is when the ego has taken over.
The ant catches the subtlety of this too. We traditionally associate the ego with power, dominance, and aggression. But she adds that even our weakness, even our genuine feelings of helplessness, can merge with the ego.
We can weaponize our own feelings of being overwhelmed to justify shutting down our conscience entirely.
Exactly. And Roger takes this internal realization and applies it to society at large. He points out the crowd is not always evil, but it easily becomes a spectator.
And there lies the core danger the text is warning us about. The individual frozen ego, when multiplied by millions of users online, creates the passive crowd.
It gives birth to the spectator society, where we all watch tragedies unfold as if they are just another genre of digital content.
I have to push back on this, though. Just on behalf of everyone listening who feels deeply burnt out by the state of the world.
Sure, go ahead.
But what if we're just overwhelmed? Is being a spectator really a failure of conscience? Or is it just a survival mechanism when there's so much going on? We cannot solve every crisis that crosses our feed.
That's a very fair point. If we connect this to the bigger picture and look at the uncle's ultimate conclusion in the narrative, we find a challenging but necessary answer.
What's his conclusion?
The uncle states, this is exactly where civilization is tested. Not in the measure of power, but in the conscience of the spectator.
Not in the measure of power, but in the conscience of the spectator.
Right. It goes back to the reality that we cannot stop the waterfall. We cannot personally fix every injustice we see online. But the text argues that true civilization and human progress don't happen simply because a few powerful people make big decisions.
Progress only happens when the path of history passes through the internal accounting of each individual spectator.
Exactly. The narrative started with one person's humiliation in a video. But the evolution of the conscience only moves forward because the aunt, the nephew, Roger, and the uncle force themselves to question their own reactions.
They refuse to remain passive consumers. They refuse to let their egos permanently harden into stone.
Even when they cannot physically intervene, they force themselves to stay awake to the humanity of the person in the video.
And that highlights the critical difference between emotional triage and a failure of conscience. Emotional triage means stepping away to recharge so you can return to the world with an open heart.
A failure of conscience is deciding to buy a permanent ticket, to sit in the audience and just watch the world burn.
Wow, so what does this all mean? We promised a reframe on how to navigate the digital world, and these concepts really deliver a brilliant roadmap.
They do. True human excellence in the information age requires immense, deliberate intentionality.
It means checking our intentions, our latent anger, our pride, our deep loneliness before we consume information. It means refusing to navigate the noise alone and ensuring our egos don't turn to stone when witnessing the pain of others.
It is a lifelong practice. It's the continuous daily architecture of the conscience.
The exciting part is that the source material doesn't stop here. The narrative continues into two more intriguing scenes. Scene 5, the threshold, and Scene 6, left on the pavement.
We highly encourage you to seek out the rest of the text and explore those concepts on your own. It will profoundly change how you view your digital habit.
Absolutely.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one last thought to carry with you. The text leaves us reflecting on the conscience of the spectator. But let's take this a step further.
Okay.
In a digital world where our algorithms are literally built to turn us into passive viewers of endless content, is it possible that our modern technology is engineered to keep us in the spectator seat?
Oh, wow. That is a heavy thought. Tomorrow morning, when you are standing at the bottom of that roaring waterfall, holding your phone,
When you scroll past a headline that sparks sudden outrage or sorrow,
think about the locked door. Ask yourself, are you going to remain a frozen spectator, safely protected by a hardened ego, or will you find a way to step out of the crowd?